Welcome onto the podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on. It's funny because I was reading Psychological when I put the tweet out saying that I wanted a neuroscientist, and in my head, and I've got to stop doing this, but in my head I'm like, he's too big. I just can't. and it was only because someone else obviously tagged you, and I was like, that would be the dream, and that was how I ended up with you on. So I'm tremendously grateful for your time.
It's a lot less elaborate than people think. I had this once. I was on a BBC Two Wales programme, and it wasn't very good. But at the end of the advert for it, the BBC Two ident. I was in it. I'm like, yeah, I'm in an ident. I sort of felt really cool and successful. And then a few months later, I was in a sandwich shop in Cardiff, and the guy said, "I know you." I said, "How do you know me?" He goes, "I put you in the BBC Two ident." Did you? He goes, "Yeah." "And you work at a sandwich shop?" I said, "Yeah, it's just a freak. Oh, well, I've taken some of the glamour off that. Thanks, mate."
Awesome.
Yeah, Ruben.
Before we get into the kind of the content of talking about basically what is going on inside of our brains in various situations, could you tell us a little bit about what it was that made you get into being a neuroscientist? Because I know you said a lot of people that work in or get into mental health fields generally have their own mental health issues, but you're very kind of clear about the fact that other than the general worries of day-to-day life, you've never really experienced that. So what was it that kind of sparked your interest in this subject?
I've always been a sort of oddity in my own family. Like the Burnett's, we're from the South Wales mining valleys. You know, they are a classic working class family from that area. Like they all singing, all dancing, part of the community and stuff. I love the sport and a bunch of extroverts. And I never was. I was always the quiet, shy, geeky kid. And it's over time you sort of wonder, like, why am I like this compared to the rest of my family and peers? Like, these are the only people I know in the world, small community, and I'm not like them. And it's sort of, just planted a little seed of something must be up with my head. I must have a different head than everyone else. And it later became brain, obviously. And I just got into science and things. And although I will say one thing I do attribute it to is being 8 years old and getting ready for school one morning. I was watching, I think it was TVAM at the time or GMTV, whichever one it was.
Yeah.
And the film critic Paul Gambaccini was on there reviewing RoboCop 2. And of course, we were kids in the 80s. That's RoboCop's just the coolest thing ever.
Yep.
And he said it was a rubbish film. It's just gratuitous. It's over the top. And there's one scene where RoboCop karate chops a brain. And I mean, that phrase just really freaked me out. I remember having nightmares about that night. So someone going around karate chopping people in the brain. I waking up going, you can't do that. So I had this really weird sort of early days protective attitude towards brains. So that sort of just went from there, really. So, but as time went on, I just became more fascinated by the science of it all, the fact that I was, I had an aptitude for this and a lot of people didn't. And yes, I didn't go to the sort of school I went to wasn't most scientific. Like I've told a lot of people this, but the year I did my A-levels, school of 1,000 students, if you added up the physics, chemistry, and biology A-level classes, you got 7 students.
Wow.
And 3 of them were me, because I was the only one doing all the sciences. So I was literally half my school science output. And therefore they supported me as much as they could, because like, well, if he gets a bad mark, our entire averages go down. And, I was encouraged and supported, and it felt good. And then I came to I did an open day in Cardiff University, and they just got a brain out of a bucket and said, look at that, it's a brain. I thought, all right, this is for me. This is where I'm going. And here I am still. I haven't actually left Cardiff since. So that's where I am right now. So that's a potted history of my strange journey into the world of neuroscience.
Amazing. Oh, there's 2 questions that have just come out of that, which number one is, are you familiar with Malcolm Gladwell, the author?
Yes.
Yeah, so which one was it? Whichever one he talks about how it's not outliers, but the curve, like the U curve, and he was talking about how smaller class sizes are good to a point, and then and once they go below a certain point, it's actually a reverse U curve, and it ends up being less more detrimental. What was it like being in a class that small?
It was strange. I mean, like biology and chemistry, there were 2 of us, literally. A couple of people start the year, but then they just fell by the wayside because the jump from GCSE science to A-level science is quite a big one. I remember that at the time, and so it took me quite a few months to recalibrate. And they weren't that interested in science as compared to me. So it was odd. It was sort of like it's sort of like having private tuition, really. Just me and this other girl, and then 3 of us in physics class. And it's weird because the physics class, there were 2 others, and they were both doing A-level maths, and I wasn't. So logically, I should be at a deficit, but they both failed, and I didn't. So I think it's just what you're interested in, like mechanics and stuff. I always had a good knack for. I just couldn't handle much in the way of statistics and the abstract stuff. But yeah, it did feel like having private tuition, really. And I found it better because, again, I didn't go to the most academically inclined school. Like a lot of students were just there because they had to be there, and could be quite disruptive. So when I was just me and one other person A levels, then it was kind of a load off. So I liked it, but then I've never actually experienced anything different, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So,
okay. The other question was going to be, did you ever find an answer through your work about what is different about your brain?
Not through my work, in terms of, I never... They tend to frown on it when you sort of try to study your own head. When you're pitching for grants, they say, I am weird, give me money so I can find out why. They're not really... it's not really... how does this improve mankind? It doesn't. I just want to know. That's kind of a hard sell when grants are hard to come by. I think it's sort of like a combination of things. I think when I was born, my parents and I just lived in this tiny little terraced house in one part of the valley, and just 2 of us, our family in and out. But I remember sort of slight memories of that era. Just finding it was quiet, it was calm. My mother was very protective and stuff. And then they bought and moved into the local pub, which they ran until I was like 15. So I went from tiny, small, private, quiet environment to huge, loud, brash, people everywhere, music all the time, banging, clanging, type scenario. I think it put me in my shell a lot. It's in like, oh, I don't like this. This is quite startling. And therefore I became sort of more introverted and scared of the wider world. And I think I became a really shy kid as a result. It took me like quite a few months of school to actually talk to anyone. And so I think it put me back in my shell a bit, them doing that. I mean, they weren't to know. They were 20 when they had me. They weren't exactly fully mature adults themselves, if you want to be honest about how the brain works now. But yeah, I think that sort of, that if that hadn't happened, or if I was born in a pub environment, I could have just been like everyone else. But I think that sudden shift at such a young, impressionable age sent me off in a different direction. Yeah.
So at what stage along that career did the books come into things?
It was well, it's something like people ask me a lot, like, how do you become an author? Like, it feels terrible to say it because it's many people's dream, but I never planned to be an author or a writer even. It wasn't something I thought I could do. I started writing because, by the time I got my teens, I was far more outgoing and enthusiastic about stuff, and I finally found the family performance bug because they're all singers and dancers if they get a chance, but I never developed any musical skills, so I had to go another direction. So I was also interested in comedy, just like watching it, loved laughing and stuff, and I would love doing funny plays and things. And in university, joined the drama club, did all the student pantos and improv stuff, so I had that side going on. And I never really got... I wanted to do stand-up, but never felt brave enough because it's obviously terrifying, isn't it? Then I spent 2 years after my first degree working as a cadaver embalmer. And
that sounds way more terrifying.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Yeah. Handling cutting up dead bodies all day. And then that shifts your perspective a bit. So like if I do a stand-up set and nobody laughs, if they're still breathing, I'm up on the deal. Like it's still better than my day job. And so I finally went and did it and enjoyed it and became part of the Cardiff scene, which was quite small. But I always liked writing the material more than I like performing it. I like performing it, but okay. I always find it quite satisfying. Just, I've written a joke now. Probably should tell someone at some point, but yes, I've done the bit I like doing. And then I discovered that blogging was a thing. This is how long ago we're talking. I was saying, blogs. I said, weblog. That's a word. I understand now. I thought so you could just write stuff, put it on the internet. Some people might see it, they might not, but it's done. I thought sounds fun. So I started doing that. And so I combined science and humor because those are my two things. And my personal blog got picked up a bit and got shared around. And then I did a guest post for The Guardian about Blue Monday. Look up Dean Burnett Blue Monday. It's very embarrassing and awkward, but it's basically that's. So I did a piece for The Guardian, went really well, and then they ended up being on as a regular science blogger, and I became I got the most traffic on the network because I was doing the light-hearted stuff. Everyone else is doing proper science, but I was just doing satirical things. And then I got the message from an agent saying, I like your blog, I like what you do. Do you ever fancy writing a book? And I thought about it, but in the same way people think of, it'd be nice to write a book, it'd be nice to own a jetpack, it'd be nice to see Mars, but it's not going to happen. It's just a thing you think of idly and just dismiss it, because I didn't think I was allowed, if that makes any sense, because I read a lot of science books, but they're all by top flight scientists, big names in the field who have a body of work to put into a book. And I'm just some random nobody. I just thought, well, I'm not allowed to do a book. That's not how science books work. But it's not how it works. Apparently, it's like if you've got something, a valuable thing to say and a contribution to make. So then we talked about publishing stuff. And then while this is going on, while I was thinking of a book to pitch, Robin Williams passed away. And that was the time, obviously, when that news hit and everyone was deeply upset about it. But I was... went to work, logged on. I thought, oh, that's terrible. But obviously the news had broke several hours earlier because it was on American time, and already you were seeing stuff like, oh, it's so selfish what he's done. He's really selfish doing that. No, it's so inconsiderate. He's, the usual contrarian, but it's a common attitude. People, when someone high profile takes their own life, it's always done in the sense of they have everything going for them. How can they do that? It's so selfish. And I thought at the time I was teaching psychiatry, working in a psychiatry program. I was lecturing on mental health, how it's cared for, how it's done. And I read a lot, and also a neuroscientist, and I got my PhD then. So I was very much on the knowledge that, no, it's not selfish. That's not how it works at all. And I think someone in the media should say that. I have a Guardian blog, I can just put it on. So I wrote a third 90 minutes I spent writing this piece about depression. It's not selfish, actually. I gave it to him. I said, look, put it up if you want. I know there's been loads of stuff about this today. It'll probably not get noticed, but I've said something, so I feel better about, at least I've made an effort. And they went up and read 2 million times that week, and it still remains the most popular post, because I think the impression I get now is that people were waiting for someone to say that, and I guess nobody had yet, or at least not in such a high profile way. But that sort of got me a lot more attention suddenly. Then publishers came along and they said, what sort of book do you want to write? And I thought, well, I don't really know if I'm allowed to write a book because of the not a big scientist thing. But also, when you read any sort of modern neuroscience stuff, because neuroscience is becoming fashionable then and remains so, I guess. But it's always like this reverence around the brain. It's amazing. It's how fantastic it is, how colossally powerful, how it's beyond our understanding. It's all the cool stuff. And when you've been a neuroscientist for any length of time, you quickly learn that it's not all that. It's a lot of it's quite crap, and a lot of it's really quite confusing and unhelpfully put together or illogical, because it's an evolved organ. It's not a design thing. And I sort of said that. I said, well, I think the brain can be quite annoying or stupid. And I said, well, why didn't you write that book? Because, all right, I will. And I did. So that was my first book, The Idiot Brain. And the thing is, I put everything I thought, well, what do I want to say about the brain? It's all in here. My expectation was, I'll put a book out because I've got this deal now. Maybe enough people read my blog will buy it eventually for the break even. And then we'll sort of say no more about it and all go our separate ways. That was how I anticipated my literary career going. But that didn't happen. The first book was and remains a very, very popular one. And now I'm currently working on my fifth. So, yeah, so in a very strange, elaborate, roundabout way. It's because I got into publishing because I can't focus on one thing at a time. I couldn't focus on just being a researcher or being a comedian. I had to combine these things. And, people seem to like to read what I put out there. So here we are, I guess.
Amazing. I had a sort of slightly ironic experience with The Idiot Brain in that I bought it about 5 minutes after I heard you on Richard Nichols' podcast, then forgot that I'd bought it. Then when you were as I said, I was reading Psychological, and then when you agreed to be on the podcast, I'm like, crap, I need to kind of dip into some more. I need to, and I went off to try and buy The Idiot Brain, and at that exact moment, there wasn't any first-hand copies on Amazon, and I was like, you know what? Let's just finish Psychological, which I haven't still, but before Dean comes on, and then we'll be and then when we finish Psychological, then I'll order it. And then I was just walking past my bookshelf, and I was like, oh, I've already got it.
There we go.
And then I look at the kind of like taglines on the back, and it's talking about like forgetting why you came into a room. I'm like, I forgot
Precisely,
that. I forgot that I'd even bought this book. I just remember like hearing you talk about like the premise of it on Richard Nichols' podcast, and thinking, I need this in my life, because ultimately it's I come at mental health mainly from the more lived experience side of things. In the fact that I have type 2 bipolar disorder myself, so I've lived with that my entire life, and a lot of how I ended up in the mental health field accidentally as well. I was a personal trainer that wanted to learn about habit change, and then when I learned about habit change, we started applying that to higher things up the food chain than food and then exercise, and then obviously with my own personal story combined on that, most people when they heard that wanted the mental health stuff. So that's how I've ended up here accidentally as well. And but we talk about the personal stories about what that's like in your life and how you experience and all of that, but we've never really got to the point of being able to talk about, well, what is actually physically going on inside of the brain. So I mean, obviously I don't want you to regurgitate your entire book, because people can go out and buy a copy of that, but in terms of with neuroscience, what are some of the more promising things that we're discovering that might lead to changes in the ways that mental health is treated going forward?
Well, technology is obviously becoming a big part of it, because, well, that's the modern world, isn't it? Technology sneaks in everywhere. But there are some really encouraging things to do with mental health disorders, because one of the things which is a constant issue, problem, barrier, hurdle, whatever you want to call it, about dealing with mental health is that it's intangible. If someone's got an infection, there's a pathogen. You can treat it with antibiotics or whatever. If someone's got a tumor, you can isolate it and hopefully remove it, or treat it with chemo. But not necessarily you can or can't, but it's like there's at least something physical to focus on. Like, we know the source of the problem. It's that thing. Let's try and get rid of that thing. Things will hopefully get better. And can't we do that with all mental health problems? Because the mind isn't a physical thing. It's it's a gestalt of all your attitudes and beliefs and memories and fears and suspicions and approaches and assumptions and so on and so on. And okay, that's how it is. But it's hard to find what's going on, what's the wrong thing in there. Like I say, I think I mentioned plenty of times before that when someone says, oh, I'm depressed, it could mean just having a bad day and I've got a low mood because of stuff that's gone on in my life, or they could mean I have a clinical disorder. It's two very different manifestations described by the same term. So there's a lot of abstractness, a lot of intangibility when it comes to mental health. But a lot of technology now is coming forward and sort of alleviating that a bit. Like there's the process of feedback or biofeedback or neurofeedback, where someone has an anxiety attack while strapped to a machine, or like anxiety symptoms. The more simple expression, like a cardiogram, which just shows their heart rate. And when they experience an anxiety spike, the heart rate goes up, because obviously that's part of the fear response. But rather than say, okay, try and calm down, or try and suppress your fear, or try and control and settle your mind, you say, look, here's your heart rate. Try and lower that heart rate to a bit less. And that is, it sounds like, well, what difference does that make? But it can, because it externalizes it. It makes it like, this isn't me, this isn't I'm not inside my own head. I'm looking at this monitor, this machine. It's a physical thing. My heart's going, so I'm going to try and, it gives you a sense of control, a sense of autonomy over the conditions you're dealing with. And a lot of modern treatments sort of have some variation on that. There's avatar therapy, which is, they don't make people watch the James Cameron film over and over again, because
they make people wait for the sequel for 20 years.
So get better or bring it sooner. Oh, sorry, because nobody needs to go through that again. But it's people with schizophrenia or similar conditions which have audio hallucinations, and rather than say focus on the voices, try and control them, it assigns like a software avatar character, and it says, and they make it say the things that people are hearing. So they can say, rather than this is my own voice, my own mind telling me, it's like, oh, it's that grotty little character again. And you can sort of externalize it and focus on it, and it gives it boundaries, it gives it presence. And that way you can it gives you a sense of control over it. It gives you a sense of, understanding. It's got limits, it's got boundaries, it's got barriers. And that can be a big deal when it comes to your mental health problems, because your emotions and your feelings don't. You don't have a beginning and end or a defined shape. But the brain likes that. Anything that produces uncertainty makes the brain feel better. It enjoys that. It finds it rewarding. So to give that to mental health symptoms via the means of technology can be really quite helpful. And I think they're doing more elaborate ones, like with PTSD, where they have someone walking through like a virtual reality simulator of everyday events and then aspects of the thing that they are traumatized by, so they can become attuned to it or desensitized to it gradually over time. So I think the technological aspect is coming forward in ways which are helpful, but also not invasive in any particular way. Like, people have issues with medication, which I totally understand. You've taken substance into your body which alter your mental state, which is, no one would do that normally, he says, drinking caffeine rather enthusiastically. So everyone does it. It's just, well, these ones are socially acceptable, these ones aren't, and that's a cultural decision we make. So to offer these therapies, which seem to be work, in its early days yet, in ways which aren't, they don't necessarily, they don't get inside your body at all. They just give your brain something more to work with, and sometimes that can be, that can make all the difference.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention obviously like caffeine and things like that. And caffeine, for example, with me having bipolar disorder, caffeine can be very good for my low moods. It's not so great when I'm in an elevated mood. It's like let's just throw some petrol on this fire. And I'm very, very caffeine sensitive as well. But one thing I saw this echoed in your book, is we've talked about this a bunch of times in the podcast, is the fact that what you say about, again, socially acceptable chemicals, because now a lot of the kind of research is going into things like ketamine and MDMA and hallucinogenics and the possible use of those in mental health treatment. And I suppose it boils down to that what's the effects versus the side effects question, really.
Totally. Yeah.
And one thing I found that this is something I've completely and utterly learned from psychological is the fact that we have 2 serotonin centers in the brain.
At least,
yes. At least, and could you kind of explain that? Because we all us lay people over here all think that serotonin, if we can get some of that, it's good, but not always, right?
Yeah, it's a relatively recent discovery. I think this paper I quote was from 2018, and I finished the book in 2019, so obviously it was modern at the time. I think just before now, the go-to antidepressants are your serotonin, SSRIs, and they elevate serotonin levels in your brain, which is helpful for depression. And a lot of people think that means serotonin makes you happy, but that's not how it works. It's serotonin gives your brain the ability to change mood more. It's I think the analogy I use in the book is that if you think of mood and emotion as like a video game character, serotonin isn't one of them. It's the guy giving out power-ups in the corner, like the little guy Link visits to get his potions. I can't do anything, but I can help you. That's serotonin's job, I guess, insofar as we understand it. And for a while, it was assumed that there's all these serotonin mood network in the brain, or like one big thing, one big network, which all innovates throughout the brain and stuff. But recent discoveries show that there are sort of 2 networks which have related but different effects. So like this serotonin network makes our mood better. This one sort of induces a low mood because it's all about making certain emotions more prominent and so on and so on. And I say that's 2. They discovered another one. But there's no guarantee that those are the only 2. Like I said, it's like there could be a dozen, there could be more. We don't know yet because it's only now realizing these are all the same thing. These are all different. It's like a while ago. Actually, there are 3 species of giraffe. What? Since when? They look the same. That's the problem. Yes, that's why we had no idea before now. But then that would explain why SSRIs don't work for everyone, because some people say they are the best thing ever. Some people say they make me feel worse. And it could be that in those people, the other serotonin network is more sensitive to the antidepressant, and therefore taking them makes you feel worse because that's what that one does. Or it could be that one's more dominant anyway, and that's why they're depressed. So, like you say, putting more serotonin in the system is actually fueling the fire rather than alleviating it. And so it's widened the field of, okay, so we have to take this into account now when we are subscribing things or developing new drugs, that there are, maybe they might be a good target. If this thing is, so the system is like, that's the one that's causing low mood, then maybe we can suppress serotonin in this one specifically, and that way it'll be less in the symptoms, and so on and so on. So yeah, there's, we're still discovering new stuff all the time. Just because there's a drug for it doesn't mean it's a completely covered thing. It's, the brain's still coughing at mysteries left, right, and center.
Yeah. In terms of kind of being able to see this and being able to kind of like record this, what's the word? Observe. There we go. I'm trying to be scientific for the first time in a long time. I haven't been scientific since I had to pass my biochemistry exam for nutrition. But in terms of being able to kind of see this and observe like the changes in a person's brain chemistry, like what are the options that you actually get there? Like it's like, because do you need electrodes inside of a person's brain? Is that ethical? Well, how do we do this?
Well, it's a lot of it's to do with, like, obviously based on animal studies, where whether you don't like it or not, it's even more ethically acceptable to study an animal's brain than a human's brain, because they're not sentient, and therefore, but that's a whole other topic of discussion. But when it comes to actual individual humans, I mean, all the time you can go your whole life to have various different medications and never have anyone tell you or be aware of what actually is the chemical properties of your brain, because you go to the GP, you say, I've got these symptoms. Oh, well, that sounds like depression. You can have these tablets, and you take them. I don't know if these make me feel worse. So, take those away. Try these ones. So these make me feel better. Okay, come see me in a couple of months. We'll perhaps ease you off it, and then you can reset. But at no point has anyone looked inside your head and said, I see what the chemicals are doing here. It's just based on prior studies, prior stories, and so on. But when people have had their brains examined in some way, a lot of it will be post-mortem, in that when, say, someone takes their own life after a period of depression, then they have extra levels of dynorphin or cortisol or whatever. Also blood samples and tissue samples can work as well. Because all the chemicals in your brain, they have metabolites, and they're excreted eventually once they're used, like they're broken down and kicked out, and then either excreted out of the body or used to make other things. So the amount of chemical available in your brain is often reflected in your blood or your plasma or your cerebrospinal fluid. So you can take a sample of that and say, this person has lower levels of the compounds that make up serotonin, which suggests that the original serotonin levels were quite low. And a lot of it's indirect. I mean, even brain scanning is indirect, really, because you're not actually looking at the brain activity a lot of the time. You're actually looking at the level of oxygenated blood going to and from certain parts of the brain. So when, like, a lot of oxygenated blood goes in this part, because that part of the brain now needs a lot more oxygen because it's doing a lot more work, ergo it's active. So we're not actually looking at the sparks, they show in a lot of media representation. We don't see the brain activity in real time. We see the indirect consequences of it. And so, it is still unfathomably difficult to actually look at what's going on in a living brain directly. So you have to find all these different workarounds, because scientists are thankfully very stubborn people.
Yeah. You obviously, in terms of when this common conception that there is, we've got like the language center of the brain, the movement center of the brain, and so on. But like, obviously, journalists like to say there's I think you described it as the Facebook doom scrolling. Let's go with that. Doom scrolling Twitter, the doom scrolling center of the brain and stuff. It's like, what's the truth about what's really going on when you look at brain scans when people are doing specific activities? Are there areas of the brain for specific things, or is that a myth?
Yeah, there are areas for specific things, but they tend to be a lot more fundamental than what gets discussed in the media. Like I think the example I use, like, media think it works. Like, you put someone in a brain scanner, show them a carrot, bits of the brain light up. The carrot center of the brain. That isn't what works. I mean, first off, what is it that person's perceiving? Is that are they seeing something orange? Are they thinking vegetables? Are they thinking food? Is that like the hunger center of the brain? Are they thinking of Bugs Bunny? Is that the Bugs Bunny memory center of the brain? So it's really hard to pin down one specific thing, because every stimulus you can show a brain has so many properties, and the brain's constantly doing 1,000 things at once. So it's already really hard to specify which bit of the brain we're actually seeing activity elevated in. But yeah, so we have parts of the brain for memory, like the hippocampus is known as the memory center of the brain.
Yeah.
But that sounds like, just all the essential information is fed in, puts it together, coughs out of memory, there we go. It's sort of more to do with forming useful connections, because that's how memory seems to work, but also the hippocampus is important for navigation, spatial awareness and navigation, because again, that makes sense, because in order to navigate, you have to know where you've been. You have to remember the information. So maybe that's how it originally started. It was like a spatial navigation part of the primitive brain, and memory came from that. Don't know. It's like, it's hard to say either way. So we have like a language center, and the occipital lobe is mostly concerned with visual processing, because we rely on our eyesight so much more than any other sense. And we have, the olfactory bulb, which is the way the nose comes. So the basics, the fundamentals have specific parts of the brain. And that was actually, that was very not a popular opinion in neuroscience for much of the 19th century, largely because phrenology existed and was widely debunked. So no one liked it. You can't do it. The brain can't make the shape of the skull, which reflects your personality. But because it was met with such, people who were so strongly opposed it, the idea of different parts of the brain doing different things was like very unfashionable. So, that set us back a few years. Thanks, phrenology. But when it comes to the more complex stuff, like the more perceptual, cognitive things, it's a lot to do with networks. Like so many different parts of the brain combine to produce this particular phenomenon you're looking at. But then they'll combine in other ways, other things to produce this phenomenon. And a lot of time, intelligence and the brain efficient capability is to do with efficiency. How well connected are these disparate parts of the brain which produce this outcome? How well do they communicate? Do they, are they in sync, or is there something blocking their signal between them that would lead to deficits in this ability, and so on and so on. So, the brain, all the brain is connected to every other part in some way, shape, or form. Could be direct, could be indirect, but anything beyond the basic fundamentals is invariably the result of several different parts of the brain working together to produce this outcome. If you have mirror neurons, they are the specialized cells that we recognize in some higher primates, where you can look at someone doing something, and those mirror neurons in your brain will have that same, will show the same activity as if you were doing it. It's a way of learning by seeing. They mirror what the activity they're looking at. And it's a way to recognize what someone's doing. They can learn how to do the task they do without having to do it yourself. So there's a whole network dedicated to that. But then they found there's a connection between that and the insular cortex, which is involved in many emotional processes. And that's, believe me now, where we get the sensation of empathy. As in, you can look at someone, see the signs that they are giving off, and some of these will be emotional in nature, because we display our emotions via many routes, our facial expressions. So the emotional system sort of latches on to the mirror neurons and says, right, they're angry, they're sad, and then we can feel that ourselves. So you see, those two systems you would think were quite separate, the learning by observing and emotional, but once they connect together, we have this whole other process of empathy, which is a fundamental part of our ability to communicate and interact as humans. So anything we do is invariably the result of multiple parts of the brain doing several things all at the same time. Because it is, for all my disdain of it, is an incredibly powerful organ, and we're lucky to have it.
Yeah. When you're talking about empathy there, it's like, is it a myth, or is it proven that part of the brain that deals with empathy doesn't work as well in sociopaths?
It's kind of, it's still a bit murky in terms of what the actual truth is. The latest thing I'm writing a book about emotions right now, so this will probably come up in that, but I don't want to give too much away, because obviously I might get gazumped by someone who's going to publish my own book before me. I don't know if that was the thing that could possibly happen, but
probably not from my stream. But if it did, I'd feel obscenely popular if that happened as a result of you being on here.
It's an achievement of sorts.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but I think sometimes it's shown that they do have the sort of the emotional reaction that you would expect someone to have when observing someone else in an emotional state, if you're a sociopath or a psychopath even. But what seems the problem is, there's no corresponding motivation to do anything about that empathy, that sensation. So
right.
I think probably like psychopaths are very good at mimicking emotions, or sort of feigning, being someone's friend and stuff. So that would suggest they do have that circuitry in place to sort of, so this is what happens when you feel sadness. I understand it looks like this. So they have it there. Just for some reason, there's no sort of, that person is sad. Therefore, I should feel sad myself, and I'll help them out. So there's a few steps missing. Why? Something to do with neurons, obviously, but beyond that, I couldn't explain it in any helpful detail.
Fair enough. So talk us through kind of the basics of what's going on in a mind when a mind's being anxious.
I think there's a lot of different ways anxiety can manifest. So, like a social phobia is recognized as a form of anxiety. I think when people say anxiety, they usually refer to generalized anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
The experience whereby you experience a lot of anxiety constantly with no obvious cause.
Yeah.
Or if there is a cause, the anxiety you feel is disproportionate to that. Like, so you've got a work presentation coming up, I'm happy about it, but if you're constantly freaking out and having panic attacks, and that's not right. Panic disorder is another one. It's sort of when you have panic attacks, they just come out of nowhere. There's no obvious trigger for them. PTSD is an anxiety disorder, agoraphobia. So they're all in there. But at the most fundamental level, it does seem to, a lot of it boils down to the amygdala and associated areas of that part of the brain being overactive. Because the amygdala, it's one of the most well-known parts of the brain. It's a tiny little almond-shaped hub in the middle, in the temporal lobe, right towards the middle, next to the hippocampus, the memory part. Pardon me. And it's heavily involved in emotion, particularly fear and threat. So it's part of the circuitry in the brain, the deeply fundamental, instinctive, ancient circuitry, which monitors our sensory information for anything which could present a hazard, a threat. And obviously this process is ancient, because pretty much every species has it with a big enough brain, and it's kept us alive for eons. So it's really useful. It's not going anywhere because we kind of need it, and it's proven its usefulness time and time again. But it's also really sensitive, and like some studies show that it can be triggered. This threat detection part of your brain, the part of your brain which recognizes threats and sort of raises the alarm. It can be, it shows a spike of activity if you show it. If you see triangles, which is an odd thing to say because obviously two-dimensional shapes, why is that a threat? But I think evolutionary history, everything which was a threat had teeth or talons or sharp bits, all of which are triangle shaped, so kind of pointy. So it's again, we don't freak out, we don't sort of have a meltdown if we see a triangle. That's otherwise Bunting wouldn't exist. It's just like traumatizing too many people. But it's sort of like the brain goes, hang on, triangle, keep an eye on that. Dedicates a bit of power to monitoring that. So we have all this going on, but most of the time it's kept in check by our higher brain regions, like the prefrontal cortex and stuff, which say, so the amygdala says, no, threat coming, and the higher brain goes, no, mate, it's fine, don't worry about it. I recognize this. Or like when you see a horror movie, like, dangerous thing, but the higher brain's going, yeah, but we can leave anytime we want. That's why it's okay to enjoy this rather than have an absolute meltdown whenever you see a scary film. That's why they're a form of entertainment, not torture. But so there's a balance between the frontal lobe and the amygdala. It's like, how much of this are we, how much power does one have over the other? Like it's a constant balance, because sometimes you need to be, in a raised awareness state. It's helpful rather than to think things through every time. Yeah. But it seems that for a lot of people, a constant stressful life or a massive stressful experience can therefore disrupt the balance, and therefore the amygdala becomes overpowerful, and therefore it has more control over what we perceive and how we feel on a day-to-day basis. The system that normally rein it in, keep it in check, they don't work. There's something to do with like a failure of the GABA neurons, or like the amygdala becomes unresponsive to them. It's not like it's been worked out like a muscle. It was this big, then we had this constant stress and or traumatic thing. Yeah. Now it's this big, and the frontal part of the brain hasn't had a chance to keep up yet. So yeah, the balance falls down on the amygdala side. So it's constantly saying, is that a thing to worry about? Is about that? This is worry anyway, because that's what I do. And that becomes infused in your thinking and your perception of the world. So everything becomes scarier, and therefore you are anxious constantly for no obvious good reason. So, yeah, that's one particular way of anxiety manifesting. There are plenty of other options too, but that's the most obvious one, I guess.
Yeah, this is going to seem like a weird side note, but it's just because my brain's just remembered a question that I was going to ask you before, because you mentioned the olfactory part, like words.
Olfactory, yeah.
But that's obviously you smell, like you sense about, your processing of smell. Is there a reason why so often smell is such a very quick link to memory?
Yeah, the olfactory bulb and the hippocampus and memory system are literally right next door to each other. For the first few years when it was discovered, scientists thought the hippocampus was the olfactory system. They are so closely linked.
Right.
The olfactory bulb actually has a direct link to the memory system and the emotion system. Every other sense has to go through the thalamus, so it gets routed through there and then sent to the emotional memory bit. The olfactory bulb has a straightforward connection.
All right.
So that's why
front of the queue.
Yeah, it's got a VIP pass.
It's got a VIP system. Pass to the hippocampus.
And I think that's because people widely agree the smell was the first ever sense to exist. Because when you think about it, the most primitive form of life were just like cells, bags of chemicals in an environment of more chemicals. So the one sense you needed to have is to know what chemicals were where. And that's essentially what smell is. It's like changing the chemical environment. And even though we use our other sciences more now, it was the first sense to exist, and therefore you needed something to, then you needed a system to remember this information in the sense. So you got your memory system, and they sort of evolved in tandem like that. And that's, so yeah, there's a reason why they are so intertwined.
Yeah, I mean it's such a quick link for a lot of people, and how obviously memories can bring back emotions that are attached to those memories. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people, it's like, if someone walks past with your ex's perfume on, it's like, if it was a good ex, it can make you leave you with a bit of nostalgia. If it was a bad ex, it's like, I'm right back in that trauma straight away. I've now derailed my own train of thought. There was another question that was to do. Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Right. Hopefully I've got enough time to answer this question, because what's the current neurological understanding of autism? Because obviously with an autism, there's a huge spectrum of there's a huge spectrum of differences there, probably more so than, I know obviously autism is not a mental illness in the same way that stress, anxiety and depression is.
Mental.
But it's the thing is, whenever trying to deal with any degree of education around autism awareness, there's such a difference between various different autistic people. Is there any common denominators there within the neurological level?
A lot of the research I've come across points to things I mentioned earlier on, the mirror neurons, which are the things which allow us to experience empathy. Like, look at someone, see that they're doing this, and then your brain implicitly understands, that's because they're experiencing this emotion, and therefore I shall share that emotion because I've got the information, and it goes both ways. And for whatever reason, some people, it seems like people with autism, those mirror neurons are perhaps slightly out of sync, or they are different in some way. Could be a developmental thing, could be a sort of incidental thing, could be an environmental thing, we don't know. But it just seems like it's almost like they're getting the information they're getting from the other people about their emotions is in a sort of different language, and therefore you have to learn how to translate it. And that takes more. It's not an implicit thing. It takes more time to do that. And same thing with people with autism. They have their own emotional expression, because people with autism typically have fine emotions. They're not unemotional at all. They just the way it's integrated into their system is different to other people's, and that's why it can be really difficult for someone with autism to communicate with someone else, because they are the ones who have to both understand what this person is putting out there in an emotional context, and also modify their own emotional output to try and make it so understandable to this person. So it's like having a two-way conversation in two different languages, but only one of you gets to have to translate it, because the other person doesn't. They're a normal person, so they never have to put any effort into this. And so that's sort of the basic, most straightforward way of looking at it that I've seen so far. There is a lot of sort of backlash now against the whole extreme male brain theory thing, which is the idea that autistic people are normally men, because the typical traits of autism are male traits, like the constant logical thinking and the systematizing, and the emotional stuff is far more women. And that's not how brains work at all. It never has been. It's a massive stereotype, and it's culturally imposed. And yeah, it's done a lot of harm, I think, personally, because I know so many women now who are getting an autism diagnosis in their 40s and 50s, because before then they thought, well, you can't have autism, you're a woman. That's not how it works. So it is how it works, fine. But like, so I just want to say a really good thing is to say that like autistics have extreme male properties. It's like calling like a short person, you have female height, which that's not okay. Women tend to be shorter than men overall, but it doesn't mean like men are never short. It just means like like if a man lives to 90, like he has a female lifespan. It's just like it's far more overlap and far more individual differences rather than gender or sex differences. So yeah, trying to come away from the extreme male brain theory thing, because it was just an easy one. It was just because it was so simple and straightforward that people understood it, then it becomes popular, and it conforms to pre-existing prejudices. The social idea that men are stoic and logical and women are emotional and open. Well, maybe that. I'd
best now re-identify as non-binary, because I'm very, very logical and extremely emotional at the same time. So
that's entirely possible. Yes.
Therefore, I'm now intersex. There we go. But I would see it as a massive compliment if someone said that I had the emotional intelligence of a woman. In fact, actually, I remember when I was a personal trainer, and a lot of the people I looked up to within the personal training industry were men, because I had serious daddy issues. They're mostly dealt with now, but I would always look up to kind of male role models. But I never really associated with them, because I was like much more emotionally in tune than most of them were. So I always put it as my goal back when I was in the fitness industry. I wanted to be the loving mother of the fitness industry, which I figured I'd probably get in trouble for like co-opting motherhood from the fair agenda, But it is funny how these stereotypes kind of like, it works the opposite way, I guess, against guys. Is that whole man up being stoic, and you're expected to not be emotional, and it's kind of good that we are moving away from that. Is there actually, and this might be a very controversial question to ask, but is there actually any differences neurologically between how a genetically male and genetically female brain works?
Yeah, this is actually something that comes up a lot, and Dr. Gina Rippon about this, and every time we do a talk, usually it comes up with usually a bloke, but I'm saying, so what are the differences between men and women's brains? Like, so A, why is it so important that you that you know that? And B, but it's also really telling that the question isn't, are there differences, like you just said, it's always, what are they? They definitely are different, just tell me what they are, isn't it? So like, it's a real uphill struggle to be objective about it, because everyone just sort of assumes that men and women have different brains, and that's just how it is, because obviously they do, and that's not how science works. But it was for a while, because science was the domain of posh white men who, not the most progressive characters by and large. So there will be some differences, sort of structurally, but by and large the differences between different women and different men are more profound than the average difference between the genders or in the sexes, how you want to describe it. The chemical stuff is probably quite telling, that men are obviously far more influenced by testosterone, because there's more of it in our systems, whereas women are far more influenced by estrogen, because that's the chemical which instills female properties. And testosterone is what causes masculinization until 9 weeks, as I think it was. Every fetus is default female. And then at 9 weeks, if you've got a Y chromosome, testosterone starts being made, and then male traits are being instilled, which is it's interesting logic then, because that means if you are a fundamentalist man who believes life starts at conception, you also should accept that at one point you were a woman, so you've had a sex change.
Oh, so, I love that.
So that's perfect. That's your logic. It's not mine. I'm not going to. The guy who say that.
That's why I love it.
It's like either pre-birth doesn't count, or it does. You can't have it both ways, mate. We are heavily shaped by testosterone. That's why we look like we do, and that's why women look like they do, and they have sort of brains. That's why men's brains tend to be bigger, because testosterone does just make things bigger. That's sort of a property it does. But it's really interesting when you figure out that if you give men estrogen and you give women testosterone, they will often display traits that the estrogen will affect a man like it affects a woman, and the testosterone affects a woman like it affects a man. They'll behave in the ways which people normally do and influence these hormones, which suggests that actually the underlying brain chemistry is pretty much the same. Because if we had different brains, like men and women, men wouldn't respond to estrogen like we do, or women wouldn't respond to testosterone.
Yeah.
So we're using the same sort of hardware, just maybe we had different software installed. Like two laptops, this one belongs to a sound engineer, this one belongs to a graphic designer. Different, they look different, and they'll be set up differently, but underneath we're using the same sort of processes. And I think that's perhaps the most that's my particular take on it anyway. I mean, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who will disagree. It's actually I won't name his name, there's a he's infamous professor in the States who, anytime someone publicly comes forward and says, downplays the difference between men and women's brains, he writes them an angry email about how wrong they are. Because men are logical and women are emotional, and he's being very logical by doing this.
By harassing. If he's a really busy person, busy man.
I am a logical man, and I harass strangers online. That is what logical people do.
Extremely logical. Right. My question. Now, I had one more question before I was going to ask you a couple from the chat. I'll ask one from the chat before, and hope that the one that I've just forgotten pops back into my head. Actually, it wasn't a question. It was more to do, I suppose, the thing about people wanting to know if there is differences. No, there was a point I was going to make, and I've forgotten it. Oh, never mind. It's gone completely. So someone says, I live in Pontypool, just north of Cardiff, and so very close to you geographically. Apart from the obvious options of the NHS and the Charity Mind, do you know of any mental health organisations that are unique to that area? Is there anyone that you specifically recommend someone look, and specifically chasing up help with anxiety issues, it says as well?
Yes, there are a few mental health charities working in the Valleys areas. I got my friend Wes Packer works for one, and a few others. Top of my head, I can't remember the names of them right now because there's quite a few. So could I forward you an email, Dave, and I could pass it on to chat person? So I'll dig out my details. I'm sure there's quite a few things going on in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that CBT works?
Cognitive behavioral therapy, I think it can work. I think it certainly has a place and a role to play. I do think it's sort of become a sort of default / catch-all for a lot of people. Like it's the go-to method of psychological intervention rather than, it's the talking therapy of choice for most people, just like SSRIs are the default antidepressant. Yes, it can help. I know people who it has helped, and I know it has valid properties, but it also is a big aspect of it's been combined in people's heads with mindfulness, which has been co-opted by the wider world in less than rigorous ways, shall we say? And then charlatans have picked it up and used it as a sort of catch-all word for. It says mindfulness. Give me some money.
We do it for free on a Thursday.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So mindfulness colouring book. Yeah, that's 20 quid more. Oh, great. So it's so it definitely is a valid thing. It does work, but I think it can't work for everyone. And there's some people, if you don't have the insight or you can't control your own mental state, that's why you can help, then it's not going to be that helpful. It's a long-term process. So there will be people who are in serious mental health distress, and CBT won't really be an option for them because it doesn't do what they need it to do. By its very nature, it can't do that. So yes, I think it's valid, but also it has limits. And I think it's also become, because people are like, oh, you can't have drugs. Drugs are bad, so you must have CBT instead. CBT is good. Just because it's not a chemical doesn't mean it's, doesn't mean it doesn't give a blank check to fix everything. So yes, it works, but within limits.
All right, awesome. What is your thoughts on DMT? Because it has been recommended to someone many times, but in a controlled environment.
DMT, what is that now?
Dimethyltryptamine, I believe. I sound as if I know everything about it. I don't. It's it's actually produced by the pituitary gland in dreams and stuff, apparently, and it's a drug of sorts, which it's a very strongly hallucinogenic drug, and thought to be released by the brain, or it's been shown to be released by the brain in death. So, like, you know, it's suggested to be the thing that helps us to pass over by giving us nice trippy things that look a lot like my shirt, actually.
Well, I haven't actually come across that one yet in any particular detail, but the whole thing of using hallucinogens to fix depressions, when I keep getting referred to, it just there's a certain logic to it in that I think it's in the book Psychological that one of the main theories of why we get depressed at the moment is also to do with neuroplasticity. The neurons which are responsible for changing your mood, elevating your mood, are exhausted by stress. Like, they're not dead, but they're in sort of standby mode. And antidepressants sort of gently coax them back to life because they work by the monoamine neurons more often than not, which are important, really important, but sparse throughout the brain. Whereas hallucinogens and things like ketamine, they work by the glutamate system, which is far more abundant and far more powerful. It's the most strong excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, and it's the most widely used. Like 90% of the neurotransmitter in our brain is just glutamate because it's the most common. And these drugs work via that system, so they kick things into gear a lot faster. Like the ketamine antidepressants they're bringing out now, still kind of being studied and tested, but they do seem to, as opposed to 2 or 3 weeks, which is what SSRIs and other antidepressants take to alleviate depressive symptoms, they can work next day or even within a few hours because they're just getting to work a lot faster by really firing up the right parts of the brain. So hallucinogens potentially do that, don't they? Are activating a lot more of the brain. That's why you hallucinate, and that could lead to quicker activity in the depressive parts.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, my final question, and then I will, be prepared to plug anything that you want to. Is my final question is, you said before about non-invasive methods, like things like virtual reality and stuff. Are you kind of familiar with the most common one people know about is Elon Musk's idea of the neural link, the idea of literally interfacing with a person's brain and being able to, fire, activate, do all that kind of stuff. What is the is there what's going on in that department? Is that a promising area for kind of the future, do you think, or is it a bit of a pipe dream at the moment?
It's annoying when Musk gets involved in stuff because he sort of starts claiming that he invented it, but stuff like that has been around for quite a while now. As in, people have the chip in certain parts of their brain which allow them to access a computer because, like, that part of the brain. This is like, say if it's the movement cortex, the motor cortex. They put this chip here, is where like this way your hand would normally be controlled. That chip responds to the levels of brain activity. It's okay, that means up, that means down, that means left, that means right. And people can, in a paralyzed state, use a cursor now and just by thinking about it. So this has been around for a little while, like the fusion of neurology and technology. Yeah, it's going to become more and more prevalent. Like the people with epilepsy have probes and sort of chips implanted into their brain so they can monitor activity and perhaps try and calm it down. And we have the transcranial stimulation now, the powerful magnets which trigger, stimulate part of the brain outside via a big magnet. So the access of technology to the brain is becoming more common. It's been used in more sort of therapeutic means rather than just a direct, let's link up two brains together. I guess there's no real reason why that couldn't happen. I don't see it becoming as common as like a lot of sci-fi, like everyone's got a chip in their brain now and stuff, because I think, people say, well, everyone got a smartphone, everyone got this, everyone got that. Yes, but anything which involves actual surgery, I don't think will take off as a common phenomenon. Like if you imagine going into your Apple store and getting brain surgery, I think that's we're still a long way off from that, just in pure practicality sense, because surgeons aren't like 10 a penny. They're not like baristas, nothing against baristas, but I feel like there's probably more of them than there are surgeons in the world today. So, there's plenty of scope for it. I think it's so far it's been a slow and steady thing.
Yeah, I think the first time I ever got excited about that type of thing was first Matrix, because I was ironically, given the fact that I'm 6'2" and an absolute unit, I wasn't as a kid, and my intelligence was my thing, and I wasn't very physically active, or I was overweight, couldn't really do much. So for me, the idea of my intelligence was my superpower basically, and it was what I felt good about myself. And the idea of just being able to kind of just continue uploading absolutely everything just vastly appealed to me from that level. But yeah, I'm excited to see where that kind of thing goes, because obviously we've already seen it, like as you say, before Mr. Musk came along, where with helping disabled people to be able to move artificial limbs using their mind and things like that, which is. And yeah, I think in terms of it becoming mainstream, I think what would really interest me is that when that level gets up to the fact that people like artificial limbs with using your mind to control them become more powerful than real ones. What will really interest me is the first person that elects to get rid of a perfectly working limb in order to go that way, to be opting in as a cyborg. But the one that really fascinates me is the fact that if there was some way, a link that went in there and could switch off my bipolar disorder, what other bits of me would it switch off as well? Like, as you say, the brain, it's all very interlinked, and it's not just, the bipolar part of my brain's not like, it's not got a nice fixed address over here somewhere, and it never goes visiting the neighbors, So it's like, where does, my personality from the day of my diagnosis has been intertwined with my bipolar, possibly even before my diagnosis. So, if you have to switch that off, where does that end and where does that begin?
Yeah. I think the example I use in the book is so people say we find the part of the brain which is causing the problem and just fix it. That won't, that's nowhere near as enough. It's like sort of like you're doing a boil wash of all your sheets. You put a red sock in by accident. Take the red sock out. There we go. Your sheets are still pink. The stuff's happened. We're way too far downstream now. There's just fixing the initial cause isn't going to be as helpful as you hope. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Right. Is there where's the best place for people to find more about you on social media?
Social media, I'm on Facebook as Dean Burnett Author. Twitter, I'm on at Garrow Boy, as probably know, because obviously that's how we connected. I have an Instagram account with the same name, but it's mostly just pictures of my cat, because that's what people like on there, apparently. And the cat does good content, given his due. Also, you can go to my website, deanburnett.com. That's it's very straightforward. So that's probably the best place to go, and all my various links are there.
Amazing. Is there anything you've mentioned? You've got the book you're working on at the minute, but is there anything right now that you would like to bring people's attention to?
I guess because the lockdown's ending, I'm sort of trying to plug psychological where I can. There we go. It's only been out for a couple of months, and only now we're actually getting back to bookshops again. And I'm doing more and more events about it, and some are becoming live now. So I'm doing a few festivals and so on in the coming months. So keep an eye out if that's your sort of thing, I guess. Hopefully be traveling around more like I used to back in the before times.
Amazing.